Schools are gendered institutions. If we look within the institution of education, one of the things that we can see is that men and women tend to hold different occupations. Specifically, if we look within our schools. So think about K or elementary school. We normally see where there are more women teachers that are in those schools. Normally what happens is we see that the principal, for the most part, based off of research, will be a man. When we move into high school, we start to see men in education, but they may hold different positions. I don't mean positions. They may teach different subjects. For one of the things that we see, men will teach more science type classes and math classes. Now, every time I bring this up, a lot of times students will say, "Well, I had a teacher that was a woman when I was in the 10th grade or when I was in high school. Oh, I had a science teacher that was a woman whenever I was in high school." As sociologists, we don't look at individual cases. One of the things that we do is we look at the overall institution of education, and from there, we look at statistics and we base our findings off of that. So individually, we all have exceptions and can say, oh yeah, well, when I was in elementary school, I may have had a male teacher when I was in elementary school. But once again, we don't look at those individual cases. We normally look at the large aspect, the whole, the macro level, and then we understand what those patterns look like. Even before starting school, children are exposed to gender biases. Children's books used to be filled with gender stereotypes, showing girls and women mostly in the home, while boys and men did almost everything outside of the home. New children's books show more balanced ways. Most college students are women. Women earn majority of the college degrees. 62% of all associate's degrees are earned by women, and 50% of all bachelor's degrees are earned by women. However, gender stereotyping still steers women towards majors in English, drama, dance, traditional female fields, nursing, education, while men are pushed towards physics, economics, mathematics, computer science, and engineering. Gender stratification. Oh, well, let me kind of skip that and get into sexism. Sexism is an ideology, and an ideology is a belief system that tries to explain and justify the status quo. So one of the things that we can see is that sexism is an institutionalized practice through which women are controlled because of the significance given to the differences between the sexes. Sexism and racism, once again, tend to be socially interrelated. Men are paid more because they're seen as a breadwinner of the family. Patriarchy is a society or a group in which men have power over women. This is typically within structures, okay? More societies are patriarchal societies where institutions are set up and tend to benefit men more than women. Matriarchal societies exist, and this is where women have power over men, but it tends to be a little bit different. It is not the mirror image of patriarchy. Women hold economic and social power, and these societies believe that rules should be done by consensus, which includes both men and women. Now, there have been some theories that have been out there to explain why we see differences when it comes to the pay gap, okay? And one of the things that we can see is that, that for every dollar a man makes, a woman makes 80 cents. Now, when we're looking at those comparisons, when we're looking at those comparisons, it has to be the fact that a woman is in the same occupation that a man is in. She has the same experience and the same education. And across the board, we can see where women are paid less. These two theories start to explain that. We can even see that there are differences when it comes to pay, not just based off of gender, but also off of race. And we can see that for African American women, for every dollar white man makes, African American women make 64 cents. Latinas make 54 cents. Asian women actually make 83 cents. So they make more money than a white woman does within looking at that pay aspect. Okay. Alrighty, so human capital theory explains some of the differences in terms of differences in the human capital variables brought to the labor force. For example, it's just the idea that there are different job-related skills, and so that's the reason why we see the differences when it comes to pay. We see the differences in the type of skills, we see the differences in the type of education and work experience. Okay, so it looks at these different variables. And according to this perspective, the quality of labor supplied by men and women vary because of the characteristics of the workers themselves. Presumably, we can see that women, we may experience more interruptions within their careers. Interruptions because they maybe have children and they're typically seen as the caregivers. So one of the things that this theory says is that women may enter in positions that have a little bit more flexibility where they can kind of come in and out of those positions. Also, the idea that women invest less in their human capital in order to gain that flexibility. So that means that they may, if they're majoring, they maybe will major in an area. Once again, if we think about education, right? We see that teachers do receive time off in the summer, and so that may allow for that focus to be on the family. If we think about in some of the other areas that they're in, they may be able to have a little bit more flexibility. So with this one, with human capital theory, it's just the idea that that there are gender differences that contribute to different characteristics that the individual workers bring themselves. The dual labor market contends that there are two labor markets that exist, and that women and racial ethnic minorities are far more likely to be employed in secondary labor market than in primary labor market. So I'm going to start off with the secondary labor market, and then I'll go back and talk about the primary labor market. The secondary labor market typically has jobs that have poor wages, poor fringe benefits. Fringe benefits are going to be things such as retirement benefits, whether or not they have different kind of 401k plans, if they're pension plans, also maybe the sponsored health care, if your company pays more into those premiums, maybe you earn a lot more hours for vacation time, those kind of things. Okay. So within that secondary labor market, we typically see where they have poor fringe benefits. It's less structured than the primary labor market. There are numerous points of entry, short, but even though you can enter in at numerous points, going up the ladder or having upward social mobility on your job is a lot more difficult. So a lot of entry points, but less movement for a upward social mobility. Okay. Also, the other thing too is little job security, arbitrary work rules, poor working conditions, high turnover. And this kind of leaves women more at the mercy of economic fluctuations. The primary labor market has jobs that are more stable, higher wages, better working conditions, chances for advancement. And within this primary labor market, we can see that they have better fringe benefits too. Even though we may say that we may not see a lot of women in the primary labor market, we do see them, but they typically tend to be in the second tier. It is also likely that women and minorities typically form a large segment in the informal sector. The dual labor market points to gender segregation as a major cause of wage inequality. Gender segregation often refers to the patterns men and women are situated in different jobs throughout the labor force. Women tend to be concentrated in smaller range of occupations than men, and women usually work in different jobs than men, even in the same occupation. Only a small portion of women work in traditionally male-dominated occupations. For all women, perception of gender-appropriate behaviors influence the likelihood of success within institutions. Most men and women still work in occupations that are gender segregated, with women's work being lower paid and therefore lower in prestige, such as elementary school teachers, pediatrician, child care workers, for example. Only a small portion of women work in occupations traditionally through men's jobs, such as skilled trades and corporate leaders and heads of states. Men who occupy customarily jobs that are thought of as women's work tend to experience more upward mobility within these jobs. This is known as the glass elevator. or escalator. And it's the idea that when men work in fields that are normally female dominated fields, such as nursing or social work, they don't stay in entry level positions very long. They normally excel, or they normally go into leadership positions relatively quickly. Women and racial minorities typically tend to experience what we call the glass ceiling. This is an invisible barrier due to gender or race or ethnicity. The glass ceiling refers to the promotion barrier that prevents women's upward mobility in occupations, particularly those dominated by men. Although women have risen to occupy jobs in middle and even upper management, there are only a small number of women in the most highly paid and powerful positions in many occupations. One reason is that gender stereotypes still work against women. The bias is in favor of people who look like leaders. When women start to enter fields that were more male traditional fields, one of the things that happens is the status, the pay, and the prestige typically tends to go down. Perceptions of gender-appropriate behavior influences the likelihood of success at work, particularly when men or women cross the boundaries established by occupational segregation. They feel the pressure to assert gender-appropriate behaviors. For example, when we see men going into the field of nursing, one of the things that we see is that they typically work in emergency care rooms, or they're typically going to be surgical nurses. And one of the reasons why is because they still want to have that analytical mind frame or mindset and work in high pressure jobs, because they don't want that other side, like the emotional side, that type of side that goes with nursing. When we talk about balancing work and family, one of the things, Arlie Horshire, she wrote a book, and it was called The Managed Heart. I believe that's the name of the book. But one thing she did was she interviewed a lot of women. And after she interviewed them, she saw that women tend to work what's considered the second shift. This is the fact that women will work outside of the household for 8-10 hours, and then they come home from work and they do work inside of the household. They typically do routine housework, such as getting kids ready for bed, cooking dinner, washing dishes, doing any kind of cleanup that needs to be done. And so it's the idea that women once again work outside of the household, and they come in and they do that second shift. So that's the second shift.